So the message that I'm going to give you is I want to share with you the sense of confusion I have when I look at this data and how the methodologies around this area I think are still very immature and not well formed. I think as clinicians we think we know what we want to do, and I think Nora has given us a very sensible and good overview. I think there are still some natural history issues that we haven't really nutted out with regard to long-term outcomes of post-SVR treatment in advanced liver disease. But I will just share with you the confusion that I came across when I was looking at the data around this, and perhaps we can have a discussion and see what people's views are. So to my mind, and when I spoke to Ed a few years ago, he said hepatitis C in transplantation is see you later. Hepatitis C, see you later. And this is how I think about it, that the transplant team, we should be eradicating hepatitis C post-transplant. Hepatitis C recurrence is a historical diagnosis. We should be aspiring to that. The issue is really about when we treat, how we convince our payers to treat all patients, and I'm going to start off by talking about that as a broader issue before honing into the post-transplant or peri-transplant population. But there's no doubt that this is a wonderful time, and we have tools now to treat patients. The treatment landscape, and this is my peripheral overview of looking at EASL 2016, we now have a lot more real-life data in advanced populations, in renal transplant populations, and the data outcomes are extremely good, the safety is good, and it's a really good time. And we actually have now a whole array of options that are here or are coming, and this is a very important point because we can't talk about cost effectiveness if we know that the cost of these drugs is changing so rapidly and the access issues are evolving at speed. So most of what I'm going to talk about is actually redundant now because there are better options that are on the table, or there are even better options that are coming. So here are some general observations, and I think there's a lot of momentum that's being generated. Initially, when we had the first generation of PIs with interferon, we saw a decrease in the real-life data outcomes, but certainly there was a nice paper from Doug Dietrich and Mount Sinai saying that the monitoring costs associated with first-generation PIs were as much again as the cost of drug. So that the cost of a cure with first-generation boceprevir and telaprevir was about $200,000 US. And clearly, the monitoring issues that we have now are much, much better. There is no doubt that these are cost-effective, and I come from the UK, where we have the National Institute for Cost Effectiveness, which was the original kind of assessment tool for this, and these are cost-effective for all populations. It's about access, and costs are moving down, and what you will see in this EASL is a whole array of data talking about eradication, elimination, and sort of whole nation strategies to try and take on decreasing longer-term outcomes. This is in Spain, Portugal, Australia, Denmark, but certainly not in the UK, I can share with you. So if we take a very broad view, and I think this is the guy you should have got to do the talk, and he will be at this meeting because he has a poster here, and he has written a very thorough pharmacoeconomics paper of about 14 pages, which I can share with you. But this is this is a good paper from last year looking at what the total budget impact of hepatitis C virus treatment with combination sabosvir and ledipasvir in the US might be. And you can see here, I want to introduce the term of incremental cost-effective ratios. You can see here the level of disease, male and female, and very importantly, I want to highlight the comorbidities and other issues that drive cost-effectiveness. So it's not just about the hepatitis C when we talk about natural history. And you can see the younger you are, the better the ISA is. And another big point I'm going to make is different healthcare environments apply different thresholds of value and ISAs with regard to what they think is cost-effective or not. In the US, it seems to be $100,000. In the UK, because we're a bit cheap, it's £20,000. So that's how we define cost-effectiveness. Again, this is a broad-based issue. This is just giving you a sense of how the field is. This is just to show you the different drivers that can impact on the sensitivity or the outcomes that you have. And I think another big issue is the lack of granularity about costings, our interpretation of clinical practice, which can be diverse and heterogenic, and how these can be modulated. And this is in a non-transplant population. This is just standard patients, but quality of life is important, risk of HCC becomes important, and I think Peter Ferenczi has got a nice abstract at this easel talking about post-SVR HCC, and all these things can sway your cost-effectiveness issue, and the natural history over a longer term is going to be relevant. And then lastly, just to give you an idea, and I was on a phone call this morning with NHS England, you can see the cost that we're talking about with regard to Sabosavir and Ladipasvir for a US type of environment. But again, this is now redundant because the costs are changing so rapidly. And I'm not even going to throw in the potential challenge of generics into the mix of what value is and how we define value. So we need to be broader than just efficacy and safety. We need to value that in the context of the peri-transplant population, but the driving changes in cost is really going to allow us to reevaluate what we think is cost-effective, quote unquote. This is the poster this very clever gentleman has got at this easel, and this is, I think, on the Saturday, and he has reviewed 227 analyses and different data sets and different methodologies, looking at Markov modeling and lots of other things, and in essence, we're not just talking about cost effectiveness. If you go to genotype 1 with the newer drugs that we've got, and this is obviously a little bit historical and not talking about the astral wave of therapies, you can actually talk about cost savings with genotype 1. So before we even get to the peri-transplant population and the clinical issues we have, on a much more broader base, we see that cost effectiveness for DAA therapy for all patients with hepatitis C should be where we're at. And that brings us to the next dilemma that we have when we talk about access and affordability, which fits into cost effectiveness. And you're a population that deals with end-stage and decompensated disease, but actually, if you look at the English early access program, we're seeing more complications with that group of patients, and there's another presentation from that. But we should be thinking from Natasha Martin's data, the net monetary benefit, and if we take a prevalence level of different percentages, that actually potentially treating less advanced disease and thinking about the public health transmission issue may even be another mechanism that we can demonstrate cost effectiveness. So cost effectiveness shouldn't just be at an individual clinical course, it should be at a societal level. And I'm not so sure that the tools we have assessing cost effectiveness are really sensitive and can really encompass these issues that we have. Lastly, the third other driver, which is causing me a lot of confusion, is the differential cost that we see. So this is again from this paper that was in February's J. Hepatol, and you can see here, these are the costs of managing stages of liver disease that then feed into all the data calculations and all the modeling. The science around this can be very sophisticated, but if your inputs aren't very sophisticated, then I don't think the outputs are going to be very good. And you can see here, this is all referenced from reference 26, and that is a costing tariff paper from 2007. So none of this is really relevant to today's environment, and the issues that have fed out from this therefore have to be judged with a lot of stringency. And again, this is another paper from 2012 with a completely different set of cost profiles associated with healthcare with different and advanced states of liver disease. So the message I'm giving you is that we really don't know what we're starting with when we talk about the cost of managing advanced liver disease and whether we can be consistent across different pay environments and even different geographical environments. Nora's already discussed when we can talk about when we should be talking about transplant and antiviral therapy in the context of transplantation, and I think that is a very important and still an issue that's up for debate. For me, I think the timing of transplantation is relatively fixed depending on your allocation system, whereas I think now we have the opportunity to be relatively flexible in our timing of treatment, and how we understand that for our own allocation and waitlist issues and apply that to an individual patient in front of us. I don't think we're going to have a huge amount of consistency, but I'm sure the meeting in Chicago will just resolve all those issues for us. So what is the cost of failure for these patients? What's their natural history? The role of ribavirin? All of these have been covered. I would like to highlight this. I do think when we talk about cost effectiveness and we talk about natural history, I'm not so wedded to the idea that we are really clear that we can salvage patients at this stage and that we can avoid the significant complications that cost a lot in a very advanced disease population. We're still looking at early data, and I think we need to see more data to be more confident. Again, just to show you that transplantation has changed in every environment, and we're using much more extended organs, and therefore the cost basis and the outcomes is rapidly changing, and that's a problem. So let's get to the title which you wanted me to talk about, which is really cost effectiveness in the peri-transplant population. This is a German paper from 2013, and this was actually talking about interferon and ribavirin. And again, I highlight to you the different costs that they've applied to different states of disease. And in this setting, looking at a time horizon of 20 years around transplantation, I don't know how they did that, they were talking and suggesting that interferon and ribavirin therapy was cost effective in this setting. I think this was a reasonable assumption to make, but clearly, even though this is 3 years ago, this is now all redundant and is really not something that we would ever consider. This is a small piece of work that I was involved with, and this sort of showed me the difficulties around this. This is just to show you the modeling that goes into all of these sorts of the studies, and this is at the stage of looking at pre-transplant Cirrhosis alone. Again, completely redundant, not worthwhile because the environment has changed, and we're looking at the different model flow of efficacy, costs, post-transplant outcomes, and then looking and trying to assess the incremental cost effectiveness in the clinical benefits that we avoid. And all I'm showing you is the assumptions that we had to put into that model, which were clearly bigger than most of the data that we were putting in. And really, in essence, we came up with this that showed that with Cirrhosis and ribavirin alone, for our relatively low-grade kind of cost-effectiveness benchmark, we were able to show that, that pre-treatment was effective for these patients. And I'll come back to that, so hold that thought. What is the other data that's out there? This is from AJT 2015. This is the Italian group, and Luca Belli has another important presentation, which is a European presentation, which I think will give us more data about a European experience of delisting and whether we think that's a good thing. And at this stage in AJT, which is a good journal, they were looking at the modeling of with HCC and without HCC for end-stage liver disease coming forward for transplantation, and their big concern was the cost of drugs at that time, whether it was sabosavir and ledipasvir. In this case, it was just sof and riba. They felt that 24 weeks versus 12 weeks was prohibitive. Again, redundant now with regard to the state of play we have now. This, I think, is the best paper, apart from the abstract I'm going to show you now. This is, again, from Stefano and the Northern Italian Transplant Group, and they modeled about 1,700 patients, and they looked at comparing 12 or 24 weeks pre-transplant versus on-demand treatment post-transplant. Again, their cutoff was different with an ISA of 30,000 euros. They talked about 14,000 euros as the side effect monitoring, and their base case was 37,000 euros. And overall, I don't know what this means, frankly, but this tells us that in different environments, and if you do, you can tell me afterwards, but in essence, they came to the conclusion that pre-transplant therapy might perhaps be a better option than post-transplant therapy, that this pre-transplant therapy was better than on-demand post-transplant. Again, a Monte Carlo simulation showing you the drivers versus those two strategies, showing that there are different drivers, but importantly some transplant issues such as recipient age, and Mel didn't seem to be such a big player here, didn't really show, but there are different drivers that affect the cost effectiveness in these different strategies that you want to apply. This is our poster that is out there, and this is just demonstrating the English early access program, showing that actually these very advanced patients with decompensated liver disease actually did require a fair amount of monitoring. I'm involved in that program, and there's another oral presentation from Michelle Chung, I think on Friday, and we're seeing that in the longer term follow-up, the benefit that we see initially doesn't seem to be sustained when you look at MELD scores. So again, I come back to the have we really impacted on the natural history and the complications. The best abstract that I could find is actually this abstract from, as ever, Nid Adfal and his colleagues, and this is really addressing what we want to discuss, the cost effectiveness of treatment and the timing of that treatment with advanced liver disease. And they're applying a threshold of $100,000 here, and they're looking at their base case scenario of child's B and C cirrhosis, representative of the SOLAR study, and they have looked at a sensitivity analysis, and they've taken these different case scenarios and looked at that. And their outputs and their conclusions is that they say that pre-transplant therapy is more cost effective, and that they suggest that pre-transplant therapy with a MELD of greater than 15 is, again, more cost-effective than less than 15. I don't know the mechanics of that. They're using the sensitivity analysis and all those other tools that they're involved. He'll be there to discuss it, I'm sure. But this is, again, now looking at the clinical issue that we're asking and applying the cost-effectiveness paradigm to it. But I'm still wedded clinically to the pre-transplant treatment, and I go back to the data that we've seen, and I would say that overall, given the problems that we have with this field, given the issues, I think perhaps there's a hint that pre-transplant therapy may be more cost-effective. So these are my issues with the field at about 2:30 in the morning. I think clearly you all know that it's a rapidly changing field, so the AJT publication of Cortese is redundant. I think we're not fully aware of how rapidly the costs will change for price for therapy. I think we could see even a halving in the next 12 months or so. There's a heterogeneity of access models for DAA therapy, and particularly so in the peri-transplant arena. There's a heterogeneity in the donor allocation models, which clearly feeds into the whole discussion that we're having. There's a huge lack of sophistication in the costings that are not easily translatable across the different pay environments, and that's before we put in different practices from a clinical perspective, and there are multiple drivers in progression, survival, and therefore cost effectiveness in the peri-transplant population. So it's not just all about how advanced the liver disease is, it's about all the issues that come with transplantation. I think, and I'm happy to bat this and have a robust discussion, I still think we have an absence of a post-DAA clinical course and natural history with regard to HCC and in the advanced liver disease group. And I think the waterfall plots are very nice, but they need to come out a bit longer. And no doubt, when we look at the statistics and the science, there are different methodologies and there are different thresholds for quote-unquote cost effectiveness. So, with all of that, I still really like the fact that we should always be talking about risk and innovation, and again, you've given me the title of cost. And I think in renal disease, where we really understand the cost of dialysis, we really understand the clinical morbidities that come with dialysis, I think this perspective and this discussion about potentially transplanting hepatitis C positive organs into hepatitis C negative recipients in a US setting where there's an overrepresentation of hepatitis C, and taking on board the cost of treatment as part of that package is an interesting thing to discuss and reflects how quickly the field is changing. And I do not wish to talk about the cost effectiveness of this in any meeting ever again. Thank you very much for your attention.